The security scanners hummed, their beams pulsing over Captain David Mercer's skin as he stepped into the Zynari medical ward aboard their embassy. The air smelled faintly of sterile liquid and metal. David's chest tightened not from fear, he told himself, but from habit. Long missions demanded constant vigilance. Today's inspection was routine: vital signs, neural mesh scan, and cortisol levels. He offered a courteous nod to the alien doctor, overseeing the procedure. Dr. Thur's slender fingers hovered above the scan console. His large, luminous eyes flickered between blue and pale green, concern's first signal. "Pulse and vitals stable," he murmured. He activated the neural mesh scanner, a lattice of delicate filaments that traced the nerve currents beneath human tissue. The scan lit up David's forearm in ribboned patterns of data. Then, the display shifted, showing something writhing beneath the skin. Dr. Thur's breathing sounded uneven, his tentacle-like crest quivering slightly. He cleared his throat. "Something is moving under your skin," he stammered. David froze mid-breath. His irritation flared. "I told you this was a routine check." He forced a calm tone. "Relax. It's just my pet." His words landed in the silent air like a pebble dropping in still water. Dr. Thur recoiled, his crest pulsing faintly. A pet. He pressed undo scan reflexively, as though erasing the image might erase it too. "You mean embedded, beneath the dermal layer?" David exhaled. "Yeah." He tried to sound indifferent, but his jaw tightened. "It's a symbiote, earth-bred, genetically engineered. It regulates cortisol and helps prevent PTSD." He shrugged. "I always travel with her." Dr. Thur snapped off the mesh display and backed away. The rest of the medical team, already bustling behind translucent panels, paused and exchanged looks. One protocol officer in the corner lifted a data tablet. His voice was flat, clipped. "We have a possible violation, human carrying invasive fauna." David rolled his eyes. "It's harmless, totally benign." The protocol officer tapped rapidly. Directive 47 Delta categorizes any Earth-origin biotic organism as forbidden unless explicitly approved. Dr. Thur's face pressed into an expression of revulsion and confusion. He cleared his throat again. "We must quarantine. Commence full biohazard protocol." David's annoyance rose. He'd complied with every immunization, every scan. Yet now there was hand-wringing over a creature that just helped him sleep. Sweat trickled down Dr. Thur's crest. He backed toward a hangar-sized containment pod that hissed open. David backed too slowly. "I'll cooperate, but she's harmless." They led him into a smaller examination room. The light shifted to ghost white. Dr. Thur ran through another handheld scan, this time seeking pathogens, DNA sequences, chemical signatures. The symbiote beneath David's skin responded, its body pulsed rhythmically, tightening around a tendon when stress flared, then easing when David let out a slow breath. David braced, pain flickering across his expression as the fringe of the creature's pulse traced along a nerve bundle. The team flinched. Dr. Thur stared, torn between clinical duty and his growing unease. He murmured, "This isn't parasitic behavior. It's responsive." The protocol officer, clipboard in hand, stepped forward rigidly. "We must report. Council must review. This is not a medical emergency yet, but—" David cut in, voice low. "Look, you're free to review, but I'm not dangerous." He pressed his forearm flat on the scan bed. The creature flickered beneath his skin like the last shimmer of sunlight across calm water. Dr. Thur glanced at the protocol officer, then back at David. His revulsion hadn't softened, but something in his eyes shifted a spark of curiosity beneath the horror. "Zynari law requires reporting. Stand by." David exhaled, his heart pounding despite his calm facade. Behind them, the bureaucratic wheels began turning. Alerts, data packets pinged off to council chancellors, and the symbiote's waveform registered on file as anomalous biotic entity. David remained still, his jaw tight as he watched the hairline ridge of the symbiote's movement calm beneath his skin. His pet, his companion, was unmasked in full diplomatic theater. All around, the ward crackled between dread, fascination, and protocol. The routine check had erupted into something much larger, and David realized this day would change everything. A few hours later, David sat on the edge of a composite bench inside a containment lounge that smelled vaguely of citrus, antiseptic, and ozone. His jacket was gone, stripped during decontamination, and his arm itched from the repeated mesh scans. A translucent barrier divided him from the embassy's main corridor, where Zynari staff paused just long enough to cast sidelong glances at the human with something alive under his skin. His forearm ached not from pain, but from tension. The symbiote, sensing his agitation, had curled tighter around the tendon bundle near his wrist. It pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat. He glanced down and muttered under his breath, "They're overreacting. Hang in there, girl." The creature didn't respond in any dramatic way. It never did, but the pressure against his nerves softened slightly. Then the door slid open. Two Zynari entered tall, robed, their crests lined with council glyphs. Behind them trailed a younger figure, his robe a simpler cut. David noted the diplomat's hesitant steps, the subtle way he hung back, as if unsure of his welcome in the room. The older of the robed Zynari Counselor Vren, according to the translucent badge, spoke with a calm, almost ceremonial tone. "Captain Mercer, you have introduced a Class 3 biologic to the embassy. Were you aware that the Zynari Accord prohibits interspecies biome interference without prior council approval?" David stayed seated, spine rigid. The symbiotes documented. Earth Command has full clearance for internal symbiotic biotech under interspecies health waivers. Another flicker of pulse moved under his skin. The younger diplomat flinched. Counselor Vren didn't blink. Earth Command has no standing to approve biologic integration that crosses behavioral influence thresholds. David frowned. Influence thresholds? A second Zynari unrolled a legal document. Clause 12b. Any organism that demonstrably alters mood, neurochemistry, or cognition in a sentient being is considered a vector of cognitive manipulation. Classification, Class 2 invasive, unless the being is native fauna. David exhaled sharply. "So you're saying because it helps me not have a panic attack, it's a weapon?" The younger diplomat stepped forward, hesitant. "He didn't say weapon." Vren didn't look at him. "We said manipulator, which, under Zynari law, has implications." David resisted the urge to argue. "You're turning my therapy into a security threat. Therapy, when embodied in autonomous organisms, crosses ethical boundaries among non-Earth civilizations," Vren said. "Our laws predate your species' inclusion in the Accord." David nodded slowly. "Maybe your laws need an update." The tension in the room didn't break. If anything, it folded tighter. Later that evening, after a silent meal tray and more quiet scans, the younger Zynari diplomat returned alone. He didn't enter the room immediately, just stood on the other side of the glass, watching. Then he keyed the intercom. "My name is Elox. I was part of your council review." David eyed him. "Didn't say much in there." "I wasn't invited to." David rubbed his face. "So, what now?" Elox looked around cautiously before lowering his voice. "I need to ask you something, off record. What does it feel like?" David glanced at his forearm, where the symbiote had begun to uncurl slightly. "What does what feel like?" "Carrying it, living with it, knowing it reacts to you." David paused. "Like having a silent partner who doesn't talk back, but listens. Most of the time, I don't even notice. Other times during jump transitions, flashbacks, nightmares, she tightens up. Releases a chemical that blocks the cortisol spike. I don't crash anymore, I sleep." Elox's gaze flickered. "You sleep?" "Since I came back from the cord expanse," David said softly, "I hadn't had a full sleep cycle in 6 months, until her." Elox pressed his palm flat against the glass. "My people used to have bonds like that." David blinked. "Used to?" "We called them Valari." Elox's voice was low. "Symbiotic creatures. Flesh-bound. Not pets, not tools. Part of us. Emotionally reactive. We evolved with them. But after the stellar famine, the Valari were blamed. Said to be biologically weak, carriers of vulnerability. So we removed them, systematically. Genocide by science. We called it purification." David leaned forward. "You mean your people chose to cut out their own evolution? To feel strong, to erase dependence." Elox's eyes dimmed. "Now we spend centuries trying to replicate what we once had with machines. Neural implants, regulators. but none of it responds. Not like yours does. David let the silence stretch. You afraid of her? Yes. Elox didn't hesitate. Because it reminds us what we lost, and what we might still be. The next morning, David woke to a dull ache in his spine and a heat behind his eyes. He sat up, blinked, and immediately felt the world tilt slightly. He reached for the wall to steady himself. His arm, where the symbiote usually curled, burned. He looked down. The creature had moved. Not far, but enough. It was no longer resting in the crook of his forearm. Instead, its outline trailed upward along the soft tissue, tracing toward his elbow. He took a breath and coughed. The door slid open automatically in response to the bio-alarm. A Zynari medic rushed in, followed seconds later by Dr. Thur. The alien doctor scanned his forearm, then looked up sharply. It's migrating? David nodded slowly. Didn't ask it to. Dr. Thur's crest flushed pale. Temperature! 99.9 and climbing. The doctor turned away and barked orders in native Zynari. Another scanner activated. The symbiote's new location was dangerously close to a nerve plexus. If it reached the spine, Dr. Thur stepped closer and steadied David's arm on a padded cradle. It's reacting, either to the environmental allergens in this wing or something else. Stress? David asked. His lips were dry. Unlikely, too sudden, could be bioelectric interference. David's body trembled as another wave of fever hit him. The symbiote pulsed in tandem, then contracted sharply, sending a searing jolt through his shoulder. He gritted his teeth. She's trying to protect me. She's shutting down your neural access to contain inflammation, but in the wrong place, that means paralysis. David's vision blurred. Then move her. Dr. Thur looked genuinely stricken. She's inside you. There is no surgical access that won't kill you both. The medical team stabilized David as he drifted out of consciousness, the symbiote still slowly climbing. Dr. Thur watched the screen, its biometrics syncing imperfectly with the human's eye. He whispered something in Zynari, then later, when no one watched, accessed a restricted text archive from his personal node. He read through ancient records of the Valari diagrammed bonds, mutual signaling patterns, forgotten terminologies. His hands trembled as he traced the diagrams. They mirrored what he saw now beneath the human skin. Late that night, he returned to David's chamber and stood over the bed. The human was unconscious, his breath shallow. The symbiote had reached the shoulder girdle. Dr. Thur placed his hand lightly on David's chest, not to treat, but to connect. He focused, lowering his breath, slowing his pulse to mimic resonance. Then he whispered not in Zynari, but in the guttural tone of the forbidden tongue. The old words. The creature stirred. And stopped moving. Dr. Thur stared at it, stunned. Then turned to the console and began to build a new treatment protocol. One not based on isolation, but cooperation. It took 27 hours for David's fever to stabilize, though his lucidity came and went in brief, disoriented flashes. During that time, the medical team reduced his room to a sterile cocoon of softly pulsing monitors, IV bags, and cross-species biochemical filtration panels. The Zynari had never treated a case like this. There was no manual, no protocol, just a quietly expanding file titled Anomalous Symbiotic Reaction Case Mercer. Dr. Thur did not sleep. He stayed inside the diagnostic suite, manually reviewing every pulse reading and symbiote telemetry update. His fingers, usually precise and methodical, hovered longer than necessary over the neural data. The migration had halted just above the human scapula, wrapping near the cervical nerve cluster. If it moved 2 centimeters more, the signal block could cause partial paralysis. If it stayed, it might stabilize his immune flare. If it regressed, that, Dr. Thur realized, depended on him. Doctor, came a voice behind him. It was Elox. He'd slipped into the diagnostic suite quietly, his robe traded for an embassy lab smock. They restricted your access. How are you still in here? Dr. Thur didn't look away from the scans. They can restrict formal access. They can't erase professional obligation. Elox stepped closer, eyes flicking to the slow pulsing on the screen. You're talking to it, aren't you? I don't understand it fully, Dr. Thur admitted. but it responds to voice frequency, neural rhythm, and breath tempo, much like the Volari. Elox nodded, and it stopped climbing. Dr. Thur finally turned. When I used the old tongue, it stilled. No medical stimulant or suppressant worked, just those words. There was a beat of silence before Elox replied, "You realize if the council finds out you used disavowed dialects, I'll lose my license, my post, possibly citizenship." Dr. Thur exhaled slowly. "But if I hadn't, the human would have coded." Elox stared at the monitor. Then, "Keep speaking." They returned to the chamber together. David lay motionless, except for shallow breaths and the occasional twitch of his fingers. His right hand, the one closest to the symbiote, trembled faintly. Dr. Thur placed 2 fingers on David's pulse point and adjusted the breath feedback system to allow for more ambient sound. Then he leaned in. He didn't chant. That wasn't the way of the old speech. Instead, he intoned like a lullaby, flattened into breath and language. No meaning, just cadence. Slow, old, remembered only in texture. The symbiote responded. It shifted slightly, not up but down, fractionally, microns maybe, but it moved. Dr. Thur closed his eyes and continued. When he opened them, Elox was holding a scanner, silently mapping the waveform of the creature's response. "See this?" Elox said softly. "It's not just reacting to you, it's adapting." Dr. Thur nodded. "Then we give it more to adapt to." Over the next 12 hours, they constructed a crude bioacoustic array from the embassy's adaptive sleep fields. Using the same frequencies, breath pacing, and harmonic vibration found in archived Volari bonding data, they built a signal chamber around the human's bed. And by morning, the fever broke. David woke with a dry throat and aching spine. The lights were dimmed, and a faint, low-frequency tone resonated through the bed frame. He blinked. His voice came out cracked. "Did we survive diplomacy?" A soft rustle, and Elox appeared at the foot of the bed, eyes wide with cautious relief. "You're awake," he said. "Unfortunately." David coughed, winced, and tried to sit. "Where is she?" Elox pointed to his forearm. The symbiote had returned to its usual place, thin, coiled beneath the fascia, barely visible now except for the occasional shimmer when David flexed his fingers. Dr. Thur entered seconds later, data tablet in hand, wearing a strange expression that David couldn't immediately read. "We stabilized her using harmonic entrainment," the doctor explained. "Breath rhythms, acoustic frequency. She responded to the same methods our ancestors used to communicate with the Volari." Axed. David's brow furrowed. "You mean lullabies?" Dr. Thur hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, in function, if not form." David sank back into the bed. "That's weirdly comforting." He paused, then looked between them. "Did I almost die?" "Yes," Dr. Thur said bluntly. David absorbed that in silence. She sensed something in the embassy air, probably one of the formaldehyde derivatives used in your sleeping chamber's wall sealant. Humans are sensitive to it in large quantities. She tried to flush it out of your bloodstream faster than your kidneys could manage. In doing so, she overloaded your lymph nodes and started to shut down nervous feedback loops to compensate. When it became too close to your spine, we had to intervene. David touched the bandages near his collarbone. "So she nearly crippled me. Trying to help." Dr. Thur gave a short breath. "Exactly." David's voice dropped. "She saved my life. But it's also invasive. Too close." "Symbiosis is never clean," Elox said. David looked up at him, reading something layered in that tone. Elox met his gaze. "We used to carry that mess in us too. We didn't adapt, we amputated." Dr. Thur interrupted. "The council is divided. Half are calling for a full ban on human symbiotes. The other half are requesting a cooperative study." David snorted. "So either I'm contraband or I'm a lab exhibit." "You're something they don't understand," Elox said gently. "That's always threatening." There was a long pause. Then David looked down at his arm again, where the symbiote now curled loosely, peacefully. "She's never done that before," he said. Dr. Thur tilted his head. "What?" David flexed his wrist. "This stillness. She's always alert after a scare. jittery, like she doesn't know how to trust the aftermath. He paused. But she's calm now. The room was quiet. Then Dr. Thurs said, more to himself than anyone else, because she's not the only one reacting anymore. That evening, the council chamber filled again, not with panic this time, but with careful inquiry. Dr. Thur presented the biofeedback data, the acoustic response profiles, and the adapted treatment protocol developed in collaboration with the human symbiote. He didn't use dramatic rhetoric or impassioned pleas. He just showed results. When pressed about his methods, he replied simply, "I followed the evidence," even when it led backward. Counselor Vren remained stone-faced. But one of the junior council members, the same one who'd once authored a condemnation of emotionally manipulable biotech, raised his hand and asked, "What happens if we re-examine the Valari archives as part of our cross-species medical studies?" And for the first time in 1,000 years, the term symbiosis was formally reintroduced into the Zynari medical lexicon. In the quiet of the recovery room, 2 days later, David lay beneath a soft light, reading a thin plastic folio of reports the embassy had grudgingly allowed him to see. The door hissed open gently. Dr. Thur stood in the doorway, unrobed, a simple diagnostic sash folded over one arm. David looked up. "You come to take my pet away?" "No," the doctor said. "She wouldn't let me anyway." David chuckled softly, then grimaced and held his side, still sore. "You had a moderate neural edema. Pain is appropriate. Full mobility will return within a week. 2. If you don't stop trying to act like you're fine." David sighed and leaned back again. The doctor approached the bed, watching the small pulse under David's skin barely visible now, like a ripple caught beneath wax paper. "You carry history in your veins," Dr. Thurs said softly, "and secrets we've long buried." David blinked, eyes still on the symbiote. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Neither," the doctor said. "It's a reckoning." And then he turned, stepping away without ceremony, leaving David to rest in the dim light, his body slowly mending, his companion still nestled close, and the embassy forever changed. A week passed. Enough time for David to walk unassisted again, though his shoulders still flared during deep stretches. True to Dr. Thur's predictions, the neural inflammation subsided gradually. No miracles. Just painkillers, rest, and physical therapy conducted under dim Zynari bio-lighting that made human skin look vaguely translucent. The embassy staff remained cautious, and the term quarantine was only retired after the 5th day, when council labs confirmed the symbiote hadn't secreted any trace contaminants. Still, a new diplomatic memo circulated across 3 allied worlds, labeling Earth-based symbiotic organisms as conditionally acceptable under supervised containment. It was a compromise that pleased no one but prevented war. David would take it. He sat now on a garden bench within the embassy's arboretum dome, one of the few places where real air, unfiltered through converters, was allowed to circulate freely. A red-leafed vine twisted upward behind him, the scent oddly reminiscent of cedar and old ink. The symbiote lay dormant beneath his forearm, its outline barely visible. He reached over with his left hand and tapped his skin gently. "She asleep?" came a voice. Elok stood beside the path, holding 2 ceramic cups of something steaming and faintly green. "She doesn't sleep," David said. "She listens. She's quieter now, though." Elox offered one of the cups. "Zynari soil root, calms nerves, doesn't interact with human meds." David accepted it, took a cautious sip. Earth tongue would have called it bitter, but here it felt grounding. Elok sat beside him. "Council adjourned this morning. The motion to form a joint species symbiotic research board passed by 2 votes. David looked sideways. "That happen a lot? You pass things by accident?" Elok smiled faintly, by hesitation. Some of them didn't want to vote at all, but feared what it would mean if they didn't. So they did. David took another sip. "And now what? You publish papers? Dissect my DNA?" "No," Elok said. "Now we remember what we were." He looked down at his own hands. "I read through the archives Dr. Thur unlocked, the old language, the Valari bonding rituals. They weren't just medical, they were relational. The Valari weren't tools. They were stories we wore on our skin." David looked at his own arm again, thoughtful. She's my story too, he said. Not all of it, but the part I didn't want to face anymore. He traced the contour just beneath the skin. After the cord mission, they gave me meds, therapy, rotations off duty. But the panic didn't leave. I just got better at hiding it. Elox was quiet, listening. She never judges, David said. Doesn't ask, just feels. Like some part of me I can't lie to anymore. He turned, eyes meeting Elox's. That scares people, doesn't it? Something that knows when you're not okay, even before you do. Yes, Elox said. It terrified us. They sat in silence for a while, the dome's artificial dusk settling around them. Eventually, Elox stood. There's one more thing. He retrieved a small carrying case from his satchel, black, sealed, marked with a white triangular symbol David didn't recognize. What is it? David asked. Elox placed it gently in David's lap. A cultural offering. Tentative approval from council. This was recovered from one of our vaults. A Villari egg, dormant for centuries. No longer capable of full development, but its genome is intact. We thought Earth's biotech teams might want to study it, maybe even resuscitate it. David ran a hand over the case. Why give this to me? Because you already live with something we forgot how to love. David didn't open the case right away. Instead, he said, what happens if this works? If we bring them back? Elox hesitated. Then we face ourselves and decide whether we're still strong enough to need something. David looked up, jaw tight. There's strength in need. Elox nodded once. You taught us that. Dr. Thur stood alone in the embassy diagnostics wing, watching old footage on a muted loop, David lying unconscious, the symbiote pulsing near his shoulder, the breath pacing they'd used to call it back down. The doctor's personal node flashed once an alert. He ignored it. Instead, he opened a new file, titled simply, Symbiotic Relational Pathways Interspecies Analysis. No fanfare, no claims. Just data, rhythms, behavior. He uploaded the breath cadence pattern they'd used, then paused before typing. Human adaptive symbiosis demonstrates not dominance, but integration, a surrender of full autonomy in exchange for biological equilibrium. Then, after a long moment, he added one last line. Perhaps that is the real strength we forgot. David left the embassy 3 days later, walking with a stiffness he knew would last another 2 weeks. A shuttle waited for him at Dock 14, bound for the nearest Earth-aligned port. As he climbed the ramp, he looked once more at the city-ringed horizon of the Zynari capital. Not a friendly place, but not unfriendly either. Just a place that hadn't yet remembered how to feel. He looked down at his arm, where the symbiote stirred faintly. She was calm, balanced, at rest. He whispered, You still with me? A faint pulse answered. Then, stillness. David smiled. Good, we've got a lot to do. And he stepped into the shuttle, carrying with him not just recovery, but a small, sealed egg that might someday hatch not just a creature, but a reckoning. Because the future, like healing, is never clean. But sometimes it listens.